This build's called Infernus Daemonium, translating literally as Hell Demon, and it is centered around the Flamethrower. First, the build breakdown is going to be at the start of the video, then the PvP matches at the end. So check that out, and I'll add some timestamps later on as well if you want to skip ahead. Hey everybody, another build video for you guys today, this time centered around the Bad Cook Flamethrower. So another weapon that is very off meta and you don't really see that often, but has some really hidden and latent potential, I think I'd call it. So let's start off by taking a look at the Flamethrower and its unique niches and weaknesses, and work backwards from there to come up with an optimized build. Obviously I've spoiled it with showing the build here, but I'll get into the reasons now. So the Bad Cook has a couple of things working against it, and that are really right off the bat something that you have to notice and build around. The big one I noticed was recoil here. So it does a rapid fire, and rapid fire is always an issue with recoil in this game because the way recoil regenerates is a little less than every 1/20th of a second or 0.05 of a second you start to regenerate recoil. I believe it's to the amount of your arm's recoil stat all at once, but I'm not 100% on that. But the point is, the faster you shoot, the more often you're going to interrupt that regeneration if you're combining different weapons. Like if you have two fast firing weapons, odds are one of them is going to interrupt in that 1/20th of a second and restart the countdown timer, allowing the other weapon to fire again and then keep resetting it before it gets a chance to regenerate. So we're going to have to worry about the rapid fire rate on this and effectively adding about 84 recoil per second. However, the weapon paradoxically really rewards impact build-up weapons, which tend to have higher recoil. So the way the flame effect in this game works is once it's procced, you have about like 5 to 10 seconds. I'm not sure exactly how long, but the opponent will take bonus impact and accumulative impact by about 50%. So it really makes a lot of weapons that would otherwise not do the job on their own start to do the job. We're also going to include that on our missiles. We're going to go for missiles that are really well rewarded with the flame status effect as well. Another really unique niche of the Bad Cook is the fact that it fires in a stream, and so it functions a lot like the Huxley in that it does impact maintenance for you. Both of these points combined together effectively mean that you want to run a slower firing impact buildup weapon, and you'll get the most out of it if it's not too fast of a fire rate. And then also using missiles will save you. Like I wouldn't use the Shao Wei, for example, just because you're stacking on recoil. So we're going to, in our case, choose a weapon loadout that will reward this. One other tidbit about the Flamethrower is it rewards time where you're using it and not QBing. So now the paradox of it though is that you don't usually want to assault boost, because one of the best ways to cover the Flamethrower is to have a shield up in parry frames while you're shooting it. So for that reason, we're going to need to hit a pretty high boost speed so we can make the most of our non-QB speed and get a lot of time in the flame. Another weakness of it is the range. So it hits at 200 meters, but it has a very slow moving hitbox. So we end up either having to be very close to them or convincing them to kite into, or to approach us so that we can kite them into it and squeeze out more range and negate the slow hitbox. Again, another reason that we want to run high boost speed is so we can maximize our backpedal speed as well. If you're against rifle kites, that's one of the big moments where this Flamethrower might struggle. However, it has incredible DPS on this weapon. So if you can get into range and stay there for a little bit, you can really shred lightweights just with pure DPS. You don't even really need the damage or the stagger buildup, but that's even better if you get it. One last, or like maybe two other weaknesses on this are it's quite heavy and it has pretty heavy EN load. Both of those are going to work against us for our ability to build a frame that can move fast. And so right off the bat, before I get into the weapons, I basically realized that a coral gen was going to be essential. We needed high EN capacity, a way to regenerate while expending a lot of EN relatively quickly, and for a relatively low weight cost. So like for example, if I was running the Santai, this one is lighter, but it doesn't have the EN supply to really justify the weapons that we want to run here, because the Flamethrower is quite heavy. The shield that we're going to run will usually have a decent EN cost, and then we want to run a pretty aggressive missile. And so again, we're going to be using a lot of EN, and for that reason, a Coral Gen to me seemed almost essential. I did debate between the Aorta and the NGI, but capacity seems to be super important because we need to be able to chase down lightweights that can rifle kite us, and so we need to be able to assault boost chase aggressively. Okay, so before we jump into the frame then, we'll talk about the FCS. Right off the bat, Abbott seems essential again because we're going to be working in close range. Although if you can rifle kite yourself with this build, you could run a Ransetsu, and that does pair really well with the impact maintenance feature of the flame in that you're hitting and keeping that impact value as long as the flame hasn't overheated. You just keep hitting for 200 and I think it's 85. But I did find just going for the Coquelette's going to work out for a better reason later on that I'll talk about. But we're going to make the build work in close range. The gills is another really useful booster for us. It has a higher weight cost, which we are going to try to go for while still maintaining that really fast QB. And the reason being is, again, because we're running a flame build, we can't QB when we're using it. We're going to be shielding. We're going to need a reasonable amount of tankiness in order to maximize how much we can squeeze out of that shield, and keep the flame firing for a lot without risking getting staggered ourselves in those moments. And so the reason we can't run the Alula, the weight is too slow, the weight capacity is too low, even though it would give us reasonable performance. As soon as we start to go into that tankier build frame, it's going to start hurting our QB reload. We do sacrifice, however, the assault boost thrust, but we get assault boost efficiency, and we also get better upwards performance, which really rewards Coral Gens too. It allows us to go up really quick and play the aerial game. And so the gills to me seem like a no-brainer. Super fast QB reload, which is going to synergize extremely well with the Coquelette as well, which I'll get to shortly. So yeah, the gills booster, pretty self-explanatory. I think all three of these really work together with the Flamethrower quite well. Moving on, I didn't choose the missiles at this point, but I did know that I was going to want to run with the long duration parry shield, and the reason being is it's very hard to parry yourself because you can't see anything with the flame shooting, and that's one of the big strengths of the Flamethrower is that it masks a lot of different attacks in the game. The Javelin Beta was extremely strong. It just lacked the range that we needed on this build to poke opponents that want to backpedal us. But like it's really good and close because you can't see where it's coming from. A lot of shotguns are really good with the Flamethrower because you can't see the arm rise. But the point is, because we also can't parry very well with the flame up, we're going to take the shield that allows us to parry for a long duration and not need to worry about timing it at all. This also synergizes extremely well with the Coral Gen because what we essentially do with this build is we approach the opponent and we start flamethrowing and firing the Coquelette, firing one or two shots depending on the opponent, then QB. One or two shots, QB, and then as soon as we run out of battery, we deploy the shield and cycle it twice in order to block the entire regeneration period of the Coral Gen, and then we repeat the cycle. On the second time, our shield will not have cooled, so we only get one shield use or we risk overheating it. And so usually what I'll try to do is on that second engagement, I'm going to try to go up into the air using the gills better upward thrust than the Alula, and force them to come up into the air if they want to try to take advantage of our window where we don't have quite as much impact, but it rarely becomes a problem. Most opponents are not thrilled to be chasing this build when we're having flamethrower damage plus the magnified impact of the Coquelette, which ends up hitting essentially like a ducat, or actually an even stronger ducat, because we're getting 50% bonus to the impact and the cumulative impact. So they're very disinclined. The split missile was actually the last thing I chose, and it was based on around my frame parts, but I am just going to spoil how we run it. The reason this missile is so good is not only does it have really great range, but it also functions a lot like our stagger punish because of the sheer damage. It hits really hard for impact, getting magnified, so that is essentially going to hit for over 1500 impact if their flame status built up. And also it works both if we're chasing and if they're chasing us, because when they're chasing us, the splits deploy and then chase backwards. So it's a very flexible missile that gives us a useful tool both in chase downs and when we're kiting, and also is a really huge stagger punish when it lands during the stagger window, because we don't really have a great stagger punish on this build. The flame is quite strong, but doesn't get a big direct hit adjustment. That said, its damage is enough on its own, but yeah, having these missiles tacked on top, having like a really strong missile that when it lines up on its own that it hits, it's just all the better and ends the fight even sooner. Okay, pulse armor should be pretty sensible too. Here we're running a shield and we're not a combo build, so we're not going to run assault armor. We'll just, once we're running, either our shield overheats or if we're almost stagger built up, we refresh with pulse armor, and that lets us get the shield cooled down and start all over. So it synergizes really well, especially because this shield has some cooling issues on it. You only get 2 deploys, and then you have to either pause and let it cool down, or you risk overheating it on the 3rd one. Although you still do get a long parry window on this one on the overheat at 1.6 seconds. Okay, so for working backwards on the core parts here, again, weight is kind of a major concern on this build, but we are going to need a handful of boxes getting checked. So right off the bat, we want to get as tanky as possible while hitting the, or just below or just over the gill's ideal weight. So the gill's is 68, 300. I'm going to go for a very efficient defenses and stability while squeezing the most I can out of that weight. The leg piece that's really sensible here is the ephemera. It gets us the most amount of speed for the weight of the legs themselves. It also gives us a good jump distance, which is nice because of the gills. So when we are on the ground, we actually get that ability to hop around and make the most out of the QB reload and offset the weakness of the gill's poor QB thrust. After that, the next most important thing was going to be the arms, which is trying to circumvent the recoil issues with the flamethrower and the coquelet. We're going to run the Lammergeier arms because we are close range anyways, so firearm spec is not as important, but these are super light with super strong recoil control. The way these work is I did the math. I'll skip boring you with it, but effectively the napalm's going to add a little over 80 impact per second, and then with the 134 recoil control, we can squeeze in two coquelet shots during the and the firing time to do 2 shots with the coquelet lines up really nicely, and we don't exceed the recoil control for those for that moment. And then we QB, which resets it. So as long as we're basically aiming for 2 shots while the flamethrower is shooting, or if you need to go more than that, just stop holding down the flamethrower and just start to feather the trigger, like on off, and you'll be able to maintain precise accuracy. So once I'd settled on those 2 parts, at that point it was just about squeezing in stat density while having good booster efficiency. This booster ends up getting us just 1 extra boost compared to if I ran any of the other boosters that have reasonable QB or efficiency, so booster efficiency like this one. It also is a little bit lighter, which means we can run a heavier head for more stats, but mainly the reason I ran this one is it was reasonably stat dense, but had just enough booster efficiency to get me under 3,000 EN, like if you as a multiple. So I was like, if I multiplied it by, let's see here, we have 578 QB cost. I think that if you do 5, it puts you at 2890 EN cost, and that last 110 means we get 1 discount QB when we redline. So if I went any boost or any core heavier in cost for the booster, then I would basically lose out on 1 QB. That's assuming you have the full capacity. If I'm running just off of the amount I get back when I redline, the 2,000, that amount was the redline amount, the 3,000. But if I have the full battery back, then the same thing applies. We get 1 extra QB as a discount. Okay, so after I had that core, we went to the HAL head and just basically tried to get as much stats as possible, and one other thing, have really good scan stats, and that's because this missile launcher has a long homing lock time, especially because we're running a penalty on it with the Abbott, and so we want the ability to keep that scan lock on opponents behind cover and not having them break our lock on because our scan refresh is too slow or our range is too weak to get them if they're further enough away. So that's how we end up with the HAL core, and that basically covers how each piece worked backwards. The missile choice was actually the last one, so I actually did the primary weapon loadout minus the missiles, FCS first, then weapons, and then we worked backwards on the core with the arms basically being the primary and the legs being the primary piece, and these two following after. Finally, I just went for the heaviest missile I could go while still staying under the gill's ideal weight, and that also functioned both as a good chase down missile and as a good counter to rush down builds, and that's how we ended up on the split missile. So that covers the build. Here are some clips, and you can see just how impressive this is. I didn't lose a single match with this build in just like the last hour that I gathered some clips. It's a shame I didn't have any rifle kites to show, but the way you basically fight those is you just assault boost to redline, try to get in flamethrower range, and then deploy your shield while it's hosing them down, and obviously using the missiles. Be conservative on the pistol. You want to have that full magazine ready to go once you do close the gap. They'll often go into the air, but running a redline coral gen means that we can also chase in the air quite efficiently. The main thing you're just really going to have to be aware of is blocking with the shield as you flamethrow, and trying to dodge as many of their attacks by QBing while you're in assault boost, chasing them down. Get them bodied into the corner of the map as well before you start to commit to using EN. If it's an option, depending on the map. Certain loadouts, you may not have that option, just have to commit to assault boosting immediately on once you get into the range, but other times you can bunny hop, get their back to the wall, and then start chasing them. The flamethrower can really shred lightweights if it's in range, and so the split missiles also are going to do a lot of work, so they can't see them coming, and so they're going to have to try to dodge them blind, which means that they'll be making some imperfections in terms of how they're trying to kite you, and it's going to get you the ability to close the gap a little sooner.